Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Benjamin, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good day to everybody.
What is going on here?
This is from World Economics, which is a UK-based research organization that has ranked the top 10 worst governed countries in Africa. So here we see them lined up. Taking the first or the top spot would be Libya, and following Libya is the Democratic Republic of Congo, Chad, Burundi, and the Central Republic. Cameroon would come in sixth, followed by the Republic, Congo Republic, Egypt, and then Zimbabwe, and lastly Eswatini. And then the question here that is posed is: do you actually think that there are some countries that are actually missing from the list that has been presented here?
Well, I think as a Zimbabwean, our focus should be why is Zimbabwe always listed in doing all the wrong things? If you ask for which is the most corrupt countries, Zimbabwe will feature in that list, probably in the top five. Hyperinflation, Zimbabwe is in it. Rigged elections, Zimbabwe is in it. There is something consistently worrying about Zimbabwe, Benjamin. What do you think is the...
I agree. I mean, we this list here is just talking about Africa, but if we look, on a broad base, the world, Zimbabwe still makes the charts. You know, so when you come to look at it, I think it all comes down to corporate governance, uh, corruption levels that are there within Zimbabwe, and specifically within the ZANU PF ranks. Now I think when it comes to ZANU PF, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about ZANU PF is the level of corruption that has now been associated with the party, with the way they run business. I think that is the worst. I think that is the core problem that we are facing, is the level of corruption within ZANU PF. This has actually gone to an extent of actually taking away the powers to control the next guy, because you yourself have been deemed corrupt. You know.
Yeah, it is depressing. But if I have to focus on why is Zimbabwe a failed state, I think I'll group it into three different groups. ZANU PF itself as the ruling party, the opposition, and the people themselves. And on the first part, what is wrong with ZANU PF? My honest opinion is that ZANU PF is a party of thugs. When we fought for our independence, one of the biggest mistakes we made was not to think ahead as a people. What we should have said to ourselves is it's all very well to have an armed struggle, but what kind of leader would an armed struggle throw up? In our case, we did not ask that question. And even when we had the situation where we had these ZANU-PF thugs in power, we've never really seriously asked that question. The truth of the matter is, our armed struggle threw up the worst kind of thugs the nation could have ever wished for. These were individuals who didn't care about freedom, about justice, about a fairer society, about prosperity for all. All they cared about is that they should get into government and start enjoying the benefits of being in government. And so from the word go, ZANU PF made it abundantly clear in 1980 that if the party did not win the 1980 elections, the Bush War would continue. Regardless of how free, fair, and incredible the process in 1980 was going to be, ZANU PF was, if they lost, they were going to carry on with the Bush War. And anyone who thought that was just a campaigning gimmick, they were quickly disillusioned when 3 years later ZANU PF launched its Kukurawundi. The primary purpose of Kukurawundi was to force ZAPU to sign up and join ZANU PF, which the latter did in 1987. And that cleared the way for ZANU PF to impose the de facto one-party state. So as far as ZANU PF is concerned, we are a failed state because we are being ruled by ruthless thugs who used the fact that they were carrying the guns during the Liberation War to impose themselves on the nation, and they've since imposed themselves on the nation. That is the honest truth.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to the opposition, I think we have people that really know how to play on or to prey on, people's emotion and people's feeling. They have realized that the people of Zimbabwe are in dire need for some sort of change. They have been through, so much in terms of, you know poverty, bad governance, bad leadership, no direction, clueless, all those elements. So when you shake them up together, people are desperate. And the opposition realize that people are desperate. And they will sell any message of hope such that people would believe, and then they can take advantage of them. That's how I picture the opposition. They are not principled. Firstly, they we cannot tell whether they are coming or whether they are going, and I think they are a big letdown, especially to the people, more than what ZANU PF has done. I think the opposition is the biggest letdown because they have taken advantage of the people continuously, promising them, thin air. That's how I see that is the biggest problem with the opposition.
I'll agree with that. I think I'll put it slightly differently. I'll say the opposition uh, really were no different from ZANU PF thugs. They also wanted a share of the spoils of power. And they got into power because some of them, in fact, were active members of ZANU PF. But when they found themselves in a position where they said, well, the chances are they will never get into power, if they follow ZANU-PF. If they break away and form the opposition, they had a chance. They realized that the people were keen to have democratic change. And so they promised the people they'll deliver the democratic change. When in fact, as soon as they got anywhere near power, they started negotiating with ZANU-PF for a share of the spoils of power without disrupting ZANU-PF. There's no doubt that the opposition had many golden opportunities to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship, but they did not want to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. All they wanted is use that as a way of pushing ZANU-PF to give them a share of the spoils of power. And that has been at the heart of the opposition, at least the MDC and Triple C as we know it. Even when they had the golden opportunity to implement reforms, they never did. The opposition accepted ZANU-PF as a senior partner, and they themselves were going to be the junior partners. But as long as they get a share of the spoils of power, they were content. And this is the reason why we have had a situation where the opposition has been utterly useless.
Yes, I agree with you. Then moving on, we will go on to the people. When we say the people, we mean, the ordinary Zimbabweans out there. I think, we haven't done ourselves any justice. Why would I say that? I think, we are clinging onto straws, or we are burying our heads in the sand, lest we face a reality and what needs to be done. We are not working towards achieving that aspect. We are easily conned. I would have thought by now, 44 years down the line, we would have learned that, we are being given a sour deal. The joke has always been on us, but it seems to be taking a little longer for us to realize that, we are just being taken for a ride, both by ZANU-PF and by the opposition that was there. We could say is Triple C, MDC. They have been taking us for a ride. The first one promised, to liberate us from white oppression, and give us that meaningful say in whatever is going on in our country, and they have never delivered since the day they came into office. Then here comes along another big, a beacon of hope, that through the MDC, as the name says, the Movement for Democratic Change. Here comes change, and then everybody is willing to embrace it. Everybody is willing to move forward with it. They sacrifice, though, ZANU-PF wanting to beat them and beating them, and destroying homes and everything. And the moment they get into power, and they are right at the opportune time for them to actually implement the change, they simply shove everything and move on with life as if nothing has happened, or they completely forget their mandate, to the people and what their name suggests. And I thought by now we would have realized that we are being played here. The joke is on us. But unfortunately, it seems it's dawning, yes, but it's taking forever. And whether it's dawning, it's at a very slow pace. I really don't understand why why people have done this to themselves. And the worst part, I could understand my granny and grandfather that is, that is in the rural areas, that could be none the wiser. But it seems as if they are the ones that are, wising up to the situation, and the learned are flip flopping around, trying to justify nonsense at every turn, which is very, very sad. So I would say, as a people, we haven't done ourselves justice. We have presented ourselves to be used time and time over again.
Well, I would go to refer to the the ancient Greeks, the, the individuals who gave democracy as a system of government to humanity. The ancient Greeks understood that this this thing called democracy, which is a government of the people, for the people, by the people, can only work if the people themselves are educated, knowledgeable, and diligent. As I said, Zimbabwe had the great misfortune of having ZANU-PF, the ruling party, which did not care about justice, freedom, and basic human rights for the ordinary person. So ZANU-PF did not care about good governance. And then the opposition itself has been so corrupt, they were willing to go along with the ZANU-PF system as long as they get their share of the spoils of power. So that left the people themselves as the only way out. The only way we can stop this rot in Zimbabwe is for the people themselves to open their eyes. Some of it is not rocket science. This issue of ZANU-PF is a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical regime that cares about power and nothing else is obvious. We do not need to go through that. Everyone can see it. Will ZANU-PF reform itself out of office? Forget it. That would never happen. They created the system for the purpose of making sure that they, the ruling elite, stay in power. And they've stayed in power for the last 44 years. And the longer they have stayed, the more addicted they've become to absolute power. If you see what Mnangagwa did last year to make sure that ZANU-PF wins, the amount of money he poured into rigging the 2023 elections must be adding up to 5 billion US dollars for a country where basic services like healthcare, education, roads, and so forth are in a dilapidated state. How could somebody make a decision like that? That he did. So ZANU-PF itself will never reform itself out of power. So the alternative is that we should have an opposition that is willing to stand up and say, no, we want free, fair, and credible elections. And this is again where we have failed. We, the people, have failed to realize, to define what is it exactly we want the opposition to do. 24 years we've been voting, risking life, livelihoods, and limbs to vote the opposition into power. Why is it that the people have not stopped for 1 minute and say, what is it exactly we want them to do? And the answer is obvious. We want them to implement the democratic reforms. And after 24 years, they failed to implement even one token reform. It should not be rocket science to say, well, okay, the opposition has failed us. But unfortunately, the people themselves are so naive, so gullible, they believe the opposition. I mean, some things like Chamisa's statement last year that he has plugged all the vote ranking loopholes is so outrageous that one wonders what kind of an individual would believe such idiotic nonsense. And yet, millions of people out there did believe it. Zimbabwe will not get out of this economic and political mess unless the people themselves open their eyes and their minds and have a clear view of what is it the country wants. And in my view, what the country needs right now, above everything else, forget about ending corruption. You will not end corruption without addressing the problem of good governance. Like Kwame Nkrumah once said, seek you the political kingdom and the rest will come. You cannot solve the issue of mismanagement, ending corruption, as long as ZANU-PF remains in power. As long as you've got the opposition that are prepared to uh, participate in flawed elections for the sake of the bribe ZANU-PF is offering them. What we need is an opposition leaders who are going to stand firm in their demand for free, fair, and credible elections. And that has got to come from the people themselves. If we have 2028 coming and we still see millions of ordinary Zimbabweans participating in those flawed elections, then we clearly have not learned anything from history. So the problem we had at the beginning will still remain, the problem of bad governance.
Yes, I agree with you. So, in conclusion, I would say there are prerequisites for us to actually get rid of, rid ourselves of this bad governance, or get ourselves out of this top 10, worst governed, countries. Firstly, I would say it starts with you and me, each individual. The moment we start thinking for ourselves, the moment we start thinking outside the box, there is no, you know, whether be it ZANU PF or be it the opposition, they will not be able to just get up in front of us and say, you know, willy-nilly things with no substance, to try and woo us. I think that is the first step for us to show that, there is that sign of, being aware, being intelligent, knowing, being able to ask questions, being able to reason for oneself. I think that's the fundamental for us to get to that level of political maturity where we, like you said, somebody cannot just get up and start speaking nonsense and we are clapping hands. The moment we move away from that type of politics, I think we are moving forward in the right direction. From there, ZANU PF will be forced to adjust, to the nonsense that they are doing. The opposition will get, I think, a stronger opposition, an opposition that now knows what it really needs to do and stop feeding us useless, stories every day, feeble stories. Like you said, Chamisa is on record saying, "This time I've got it all covered. Takasunga one, Takasunga does it. It will not happen again." And for sure it happened. And it happened even worse because now he's homeless in terms of a party. You see. So we need to start thinking for ourselves. And then I think the moment we do that, I think we've laid a perfect foundation such that even the politicians have to change their game. They have to up their game. Right now they're playing shallow because we are naive. We are not being able to think for ourselves. We are just taking anything that is thrown at us and we are picking it up and believing and running with that. So I think that is our biggest problem, ourselves, our inability to think for ourselves.
Well, I refer to elections 2028. South Africa has just had its elections last month. I think many people would admit that those elections were free, fair, and credible. What happened in South Africa should be happening in Zimbabwe. The opposition were allowed to campaign freely. The people were allowed to vote freely. South Africans in the diaspora were able to vote, cast their vote. In Zimbabwe, Zimbabweans in the diaspora denied the vote. We saw in last year's elections how ZANU-PF was intimidating people, frog marching them to attend its own rallies, and then frog marching them to participate. We all know that the 2023 elections, there was not even a verified voters roll. We need free, fair, and credible elections. It is not rocket science. Why people keep on participating in election processes that are so flawed? The opposition are participating because they know that as long as they participate, they will win some of the few seats ZANU-PF always gives away to entice the opposition to participate. The problem is with us, the electorate. We gain absolutely nothing from participating in these flawed elections, except to give ZANU-PF legitimacy. And their cohorts, the opposition, those few seats. And all we get in return is perpetuating the dictatorship. How anyone can fail to see such a thing, even now, it beggars belief. So, in conclusion, what we need in Zimbabwe is an electorate that's going to open their eyes and open their minds. We need free, fair, and credible elections. And I'll conclude playing a video clip of Dr. Neves Mumba, who was the chair of the SADC election observer team last year. And he is reminding all Zimbabweans here what we need to do to make sure that 2028 elections are free, fair, and credible. Thank you very much, Benjamin. And the listeners, thank you very much for joining us. We'll just close with this video clip.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, let me be clear that the changing of any dynamic or situation in any of our African countries is a preserve of the citizens of that country, in this case, the Zimbabwean people. An election observation team goes there to support the process by observing and being able to release a statement of our observations that, for instance, in Zimbabwe, we raised several issues of transparency and also the independence of the Electoral Commission and things which happen in many other countries, But at the end of the day, once we produce the report and make it available to the Zimbabwean authorities and eventually to the Zimbabwean people, it really remains the preserve of the Zimbabwean people to fight for the freedoms that they need themselves and to correct those issues that have been observed. The reason why we have multiple observation missions is to ensure that, there is a comparison, taking place between the SADC report and the European Union report, the African Union report. And then they can see that those issues that repeat themselves in all these reports, it's up to the Zimbabwean people. And this is where I appeal to all political leaders, not only in Zimbabwe, especially the elections that are coming in Mozambique, that are coming in South Africa, in DRC. We have to make up our minds that, look, at the end of the day, once the people in the country are given an opportunity to monitor the elections, because they also monitor, it starts not during the day of the elections. They must make sure that the constitutional lacunas that can affect a good election are dealt with months before the election. And they must fight to ensure that there's a level playing field. They should never wait for the time when the election is taking place. They must also insist that the electoral commissions and the governments in those countries abide by international norms in holding democratic elections. And this fight must be more vicious before the election comes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mumba. And Ben, thank you very much for joining the discussion today. Goodbye.
Thank you. Good night.